Welcome to tonight's story. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your support helps bring these immersive journeys to life. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Leave your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Now close your eyes, slow your breathing, and imagine this. The year is 1865, and you've just woken up beneath a sky so wide it seems to press against the earth. The air smells of dust and horse sweat and gun oil. You're lying on cracked earth somewhere outside a town whose name is half rubbed off a sun-bleached signpost. The letters that remain spell hope, or maybe hell. You sit up slowly, your body aches. Your clothes are unfamiliar canvas trousers, a sweat-stiff shirt, leather boots with dust embedded so deep it might never come out. A hat sits nearby, dented and worn, as if it's seen more miles than you have dreams. There's no phone, no map, no sound except the creak of dry branches and the distant jangle of spurs. You are alone, but not for long, because in 1865, in the American frontier, nothing stays quiet for long. The Wild West is not a place, it's a pressure system, a collision of desperation and opportunity, of lawlessness and code. The moment you stand, you've made a choice: survive or be forgotten. Your first step should be to check your pockets, carefully, slowly. Inside, you'll likely find a few coins, silver dollars, worn smooth. Maybe a Confederate bill that's worth less than the paper it's printed on. There may be a stub of pencil, a torn photograph of a woman whose eyes suggest sadness, strength, or warning. There might be a folded paper with a crude map in a single word: tombstone, or run. Every item is a clue, a story, or a debt. If there's a gun, don't draw it. Not yet. Feel the weight. Smell the oil. Know it like you know your heartbeat. Because out here, a gun isn't a weapon, it's a reputation. Next, you'll want to find water. That's more valuable than gold. Look for cottonwood trees. Listen for flies. Follow animal tracks. But whatever you do, don't drink from a still pond. That's snake country. The locals will tell you to watch for the shimmer. That's not just sun, that's warning. Once you've sated your thirst, your next decision is shelter. The midday heat can cook your brain. The night cold can freeze your fingers. You'll need a place with a roof, a door, and fewer bullet holes than windows. An abandoned barn might work, a dugout along a dry creek bed. But keep your back to a wall. Never trust an open field. Not here, not now. If you spot a town in the distance, approach it slow. Walk, don't ride unless you already have a horse. If you do, congratulations. You've got the closest thing to a bank account. But horses attract attention, and attention gets you questions, and questions get you dead. When you reach town, stop just outside and observe. Count the chimneys, watch for smoke. See how many men walk with their right hand resting near their belt? Are the saloon doors swinging? Is the church bell cracked? Are children playing, or are women staring out from behind curtains? All of it matters. All of it speaks. When you enter, nod to no one. Speak only when spoken to. Ask for water before whiskey. Say sir to anyone over 40 and ma'am to anyone carrying a basket or a gun. Don't gamble your coins unless you're ready to lose more than money. And never ask about the sheriff unless you already know who he is. Because if there's one rule in 1865, it's this: power doesn't announce itself. It watches, it waits, it smiles with teeth. At the saloon, order coffee if they have it. Not for the taste, but to keep your mind sharp. Listen more than you speak. The piano player is likely deaf in one ear and knows every secret in town. The bartender knows where the bodies are buried, some of them literally. And if a man in a black hat offers to buy you a drink, say no. That's not hospitality. That's a hook. You'll need a name. If you don't remember yours, invent one. Something simple, biblical. Luke, James, Ruth. Don't use Doc, don't use kid, and never ever call yourself king. That's an invitation to duel. And you're not ready? Not yet. Once you've secured a place to sleep, a cot in the back of the saloon, a hayloft, A patch of ground near the livery plan your next move. Ask yourself what you want. To get home? To survive? To understand why you're here? The West doesn't care about your past. It cares about your choices. Every handshake is a test. Every glance a threat. Every sunrise a chance to live or vanish. If you stay quiet, if you stay smart, if you remember that the loudest man in the room is usually the one who dies first, you might just make it through the first day. And that's all the West ever offers. One day, then another, then maybe a life. If you're lucky, if you're careful, if you remember what matters. Water, shade, sile, once. And your name, even if it's not yours. Because in 1865, identity is armor, and trust is currency. And no one, not even the preacher, gives anything for free. If you manage to survive until dusk, you'll notice how the town changes with the light. As the sun lowers, every shadow grows teeth. Doors are bolted, curtains drawn. The piano music stops. The preacher locks the church not with the key, but with the nail through the handle. And the sheriff, if there is one, disappears. This is when the real town wakes up. The version that sleeps by day and hunts by night. You might hear laughter that doesn't sound right. You might see a lantern flicker in a building that looked abandoned hours earlier, and if you hear a harmonica, don't follow it. It's never just music. The Wild West has rules, but they're spoken in whispers. For instance, never walk past a red curtain. Never accept a coin from a child. Never touch a hat that isn't yours. These aren't superstitions. These are survival mechanisms, passed down not in books, but in scars. If you get hungry, and you will, remember that food is not a comfort here, it's a gamble. Jerky can be tainted. Bread may hide bugs. Stew could be made from something you'd rather not name, but eat anyway. Hunger will kill you faster than pride. Just chew slow, and don't ask what the meat is. The cook won't tell you, and you wouldn't want to know. If someone invites you to a back room, decline. If someone insists, run. If they block your path, look down. Because in this time, the floor will tell you more than a face ever could. Scuff marks mean struggle. Bloodstains mean memory. And a perfectly clean plank might mean someone cleaned up just recently. There are always people watching. The woman knitting in the corner. The man asleep with his boots on. The boy pretending to chase chickens. All of them are listening, measuring you. They don't care where you came from, only whether you're a threat, or an asset, or an easy mark. Don't tell anyone the truth. The truth is a weapon, and you're not the one holding it. Sleep with your boots on. Sleep with your back against the wall. Sleep with one eye open, not because someone might attack, but because someone definitely will. The only question is when. If a stranger knocks, don't answer. If they say your name, definitely don't answer. Because in 1865, names are traded like cattle. And the person who says yours may not be looking for a reunion. They may be looking for a bounty, or revenge, or proof that you exist so they can erase you. When you wake, if you're still alive, go to the general store. Not to buy supplies, but to learn. The shelves will tell you what the town fears. If there's salt, but no sugar, they expect blood, not comfort. If there are candles, but no matches, they prepare for darkness. If there are ropes, but no nails, they're building gallows, not homes. Every item is a message. Every missing item is a warning. You'll want a horse, eventually. But don't buy one. Earn one. Horses here are not sold. They are given by those who owe or fear or respect. You'll know you're doing something right when someone offers you a saddle without smiling. That's the West's version of a compliment. And it might just mean you're starting to belong. But belonging is dangerous. Because the more you fit in, the more you are bound by their rules. And those rules don't forgive. If you break one, even by accident, even with good intentions, the punishment is swift and public and permanent. They won't just shoot you. They'll erase you. No marker, no name. Just another shallow grave near the edge of town where the sagebrush grows thick to hide the bones. There is no sheriff to protect you, no doctor to heal you, no priest to save you. In the Wild West, every man is his own law, every woman her own legend, and every child learns to lie before they learn to count. This is not your world, but it is now your problem. The goal is not to conquer it. The goal is to leave it alive, intact, and unchanged. Because change is what the West hates most, and it kills what it cannot control. If you find a train track, follow it. Not to the train, but away from it. Trains bring strangers. Strangers bring questions. Questions bring fire. If you find a telegraph office, don't send a message. Messages are read. And once read, they're shared. And once shared, you no longer control your story. Better to be a mystery. Better to be forgotten. Better to be gone. Because the West doesn't write history. It buries it. Carefully, quietly, completely. So walk lightly, speak softly, trust slowly. And when you finally see a sign that says, "Next town, 12 miles," ask yourself if you're ready. Because you've survived one day, but the next one will ask more, and the next even more. Until the West isn't something you're surviving, it's something you are. And that's when it's most dangerous. When you belong so much you forget who you were, what you came from, what you're running toward, or away from. So before the sun rises again, ask yourself one final question, not "How did I get here?" or "How do I leave?" but this: what part of me chose this? Because in 1865, every journey begins with a choice, even if you don't remember making it. Especially if you don't remember making it. The second day in the Wild West is not about orientation. It's about transformation. The town does not welcome you, it watches you. Not to understand, but to categorize. Are you prey, threat, or anomaly? If you make the mistake of thinking you've adapted after one night, the town will correct you. The dust feels different. It's not just grit now, it's memory. Each footprint you leave is a declaration. I exist. And existing here has consequences. You'll pass by buildings that weren't there yesterday. Or maybe they were, and you just weren't meant to see them. A tailor shop that smells too clean, a bathhouse with no windows, a saloon with no music but always the sound of shuffling cards. These are traps disguised as services, lures for the unwary. If someone calls your name before you introduce yourself, don't correct them. Don't even acknowledge it. Names in the West are fluid, temporary. Some are earned, others are stolen. If someone mistakes you for someone else, that's a gift. Wear it. Live it. Because the person you were yesterday is no longer safe. You'll start to notice how time fractures. The town clock may chime twice at midnight. Or not at all. Morning might come late. Or too early. And the sun might rise red not with beauty but with warning. You're entering the stage where the line between superstition and law becomes irrelevant. Because here, belief is enforcement. Say the wrong thing, and a rumor will sentence you before a bullet does. There's a man who sits outside the barber shop. He never speaks, never moves, just chews tobacco and stares. But if you ask about him, you won't get answers. You'll get silence, which is an answer in itself. Every town has one, a relic, a reminder of what happens when you don't follow the rules, or when you follow the wrong ones. The local preacher might seem like a safe bet, a moral compass. But don't be fooled. His sermons aren't about salvation. They're warnings in parable form. Every story he tells ends in punishment. A woman who lied, a man who stole, a child who played with a coin on the Sabbath. And always, they vanish. Not just from town, but from memory. Ask anyone the next day, and they'll say, "What woman?" or "What child?" You'll begin to feel it too, that gnawing sensation that maybe you imagine them. Maybe you're imagining all of this. But then the wind shifts, and you hear a scream behind the church, and you know, you're not imagining anything. The West doesn't give you visions. It gives you clarity. Terrible, unrelenting clarity. You'll be tempted to trust someone. Maybe the woman who hands you coffee in the morning, or the boy who warns you not to use the back alley. But trust is currency here, and it's always counterfeit. People help you not because they care, but because they need a favor in return, or because they've been promised something for your compliance. Nothing is free. Not even kindness. Especially not kindness. You might try to write things down to make sense of your days. Don't. Writing is dangerous. Ink leaves trails. And trails attract followers. If you must remember something, whisper it to the earth and step on it. That's the safest journal in 1865. You'll see stars at night like you've never seen before. Beautiful. Endless. But don't be fooled. The sky isn't watching over you, it's warning you. Every star is a ghost. Every constellation, a story of someone who tried to change this place and failed spectacularly. If you hear someone singing in the dark, shut your eyes. The song isn't for you. It's for someone who never left. The West has echoes, not of sound, but of fate. If you stand still long enough, you'll feel them lives that loop, deaths that repeat, choices that rot in the soil but never die. And you'll wonder, am I just another echo? Or am I the scream that finally breaks the cycle? But don't ask that aloud, because someone might answer. And the answer will hurt. If you find a coin with no markings, don't pick it up. It's not currency. It's a wager. And the moment your skin touches it, the game begins. You won't know the rules. You won't know the stakes. But the town will. And every glance, every word, every silence from that point on will carry weight you can't measure. You'll sit in the saloon just to breathe, just to watch. And that's when you'll notice the piano has no player. Yet it plays. Always the same tune. A lullaby, you think at first. But listen longer, and it becomes a dirge. Some say the piano was cursed after a wedding gone wrong. Others say it was never played by human hands to begin with. Don't ask which is true. Neither answer is comforting. You'll meet a sheriff, or a man who claims to be, his badge is old, scratched, maybe even fake, but his voice is steady, his eyes not so much. They twitch when you mention the year. It's always been 1865, he says. But when you press him, when you show him the date on your pocket watch, he pauses, just for a breath. Then you shouldn't be here, he says, and walks away. Don't follow. You'll see a woman in a red dress who walks the same path every afternoon. Same pace, same posture. Some say she's looking for her husband. Others say she's a ghost who doesn't know she's dead. But the truth is worse. She's a warning. A loop in human form. A visual reminder that in this town, not all movement is progress. You may be tempted to leave, to ride out at dawn or slip away at dusk. Don't. The town doesn't let people go, not without a cost. There are tracks that lead out, yes. But the moment your boots cross them, time changes. You'll ride for hours and end up where you started. Or you'll find yourself in a place that doesn't exist on any map. A forest that breathes. A desert where shadows whisper. A canyon where your voice never echoes back. That's when you'll realize this isn't the past. It's a place built from memory and myth. A constructed echo of a time that never was, but always haunts. And it feeds on belief. Yours. The more you try to understand it, the deeper you sink. The trick is not to solve the West. It's to survive it. And survival here isn't about strength. It's about surrender. Not giving up, but giving in. Accepting that logic bends, time loops, and people wear masks not to deceive but to protect themselves from what they've seen. You'll feel eyes on you. Always. Some are real, some are memories. Others are promises made by things that have no mouth but still speak. When you drink water, taste it first. If it's too sweet, it remembers something. If it's too bitter, it's forgetting you. The safest water is the one that tastes like nothing. Like loss, like absence, like truth. And when you sleep, if you sleep, bind your wrists with thread. Not to prevent movement, but to remind yourself you're still here. Dreams in this place don't end when you wake. Some of them escape. And if they see you unbound, they'll return. Not to haunt, but to become you. This is the West, not of history, but of hunger. It doesn't want your body. It wants your understanding, your surrender, your belief that maybe, just maybe, you were always meant to be here. And if that thought comforts you, even for a moment, run. Because that means it's working. It's changing you. And the moment you stop fighting, the moment you call it home, is the moment it begins to forget you ever came from anywhere else. You will wake to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a silence so complete it presses against your ears, like the world itself is holding its breath. Outside your window, the sun hangs too still, as if the sky forgot to move. The street is empty, yet there are too many footprints in the dirt. You'll think you dreamed it all, the sheriff's eyes, the red-dressed woman, the coin with no markings. But when you check your pockets, the coin is still there, warmer than it should be. That's how you'll know the West remembers you. Breakfast in this town isn't a meal, it's a ritual. Don't ask for eggs unless you want to be told a story you won't forget. Don't drink the milk, it sours faster than it should, and some say it curdles when lies are told nearby. Stick to black coffee, but sip slowly. The grounds sometimes form shapes in the bottom of the cup, and if you stare too long, they'll move. The locals won't ask where you're from. They'll ask when you're from. If you answer honestly, they'll nod, then walk away. If you lie, they'll smile, and keep smiling, too long, too wide, as if the act of lying gave them permission to forget their own masks. There's a boy who sits near the general store, carving animals from wood. Don't speak to him. He doesn't answer, but if you watch long enough, you'll see the creatures he carves twitch. Not movement, not life, but possibility. Like they remember something you don't. You may hear music coming from an alley. Not the piano this time. Fiddles, drums. A soft, haunting wail that has no words. Don't follow it. It leads nowhere. Or worse, everywhere at once. There's a house at the edge of town. Small, white, always with one curtain drawn. Inside, they say, is a mirror that doesn't reflect you, but reflects who you w. Ere before the West found you. Some go inside and come out laughing. Others never come out at all. The church rings its bell every hour, but the hands on the clock don't move. A man in a long coat rings it manually, though no one asked him to. He claims it keeps the darkness at bay. Not night, darkness. A presence, not a time. And if he ever stops, even for a moment, the town shivers. At noon, shadows vanish for exactly 60 seconds. Not shrink, not move, vanish. People stop talking when it happens. Even the wind dies. And when the shadows return, they don't always align with the people who cast them. That's why everyone checks the ground first before walking on. You'll begin to forget things. Not memories, concepts. What year it is. What a circle is. The sound of your own name. The West peels you, not violently, but gently, like sand smoothing stone. You won't notice until you try to write your name, and your hand hesitates. The letters look wrong, not unfamiliar, just misplaced. You'll meet a man who speaks only in questions. Not riddles, questions. One after the other, never waiting for an answer. Don't try to reply, he's not talking to you. He's remembering himself aloud, hoping someone will anchor him to the present. Don't offer to help. The last person who did became a question too. The saloon door creaks at the same pitch every time. Some say it's tuned. A musician once claimed the door played a perfect B-flat. He went mad 3 days later, convinced the note was a message. You'll start hearing the same names over and over. Maureen, Eli, Wren. But you'll never meet them. Only hear their names whispered, carved, sung. They're either gone or never were. And yet, the town won't let go of them. That's your clue. If the town says your name too often, if strangers repeat it, if children sing it in jump rope songs, it means the West has started writing you into itself. Becoming legend here isn't an honor, it's a trap. You become a part of its cycle. Your story told by mouths who never met you. Your face drawn by hands that never saw you. Your life remembered wrong, but remembered forever. And if you hear someone tell your story and it's not your voice, it's too late. The West has claimed you. And the only thing left to do is listen. Listen as they get it wrong, as they forget your real name, as they tell the tale with the same mistakes over and over, until even you start to believe them. That's the final cruelty. You won't vanish. You'll echo. In songs, in whispers, in warnings scratched on old signs. Don't trust the stranger in the hat. If he offers you the coin, run. He wasn't always part of the West, but now he's all that's left. And the next person who stumbles in, who wakes up in 1865, who sips the bitter water and sees a boy carving twitching wolves, they'll ask about you. And someone will point not to a person but to a shape in the distance, a figure always walking away, never turning around. And they'll say, "That's him. That's the one who thought he could leave." You don't choose to head out of town. The road chooses you. At some point, maybe after the third day without sleep, or the moment the boy's carvings begin to resemble people you once knew, you'll feel pulled, not by fear, but by momentum. The West never begs you to stay. It lets you leave because it knows what's waiting beyond the ridge. The desert isn't a place, it's a test. The moment you cross the town's invisible border, you'll notice it. The shift. Colors fade slightly. Sounds become sharper. Wind hums with purpose. And the sky vast, brutal, endless tilts just slightly wrong, like you've entered a painting that resents your presence. Your boots will sink just a little deeper in the dust. The air dries not only your skin, but your thoughts. Ideas crack. Memory flakes. You'll look back. The town will still be there, but smaller, dimmer, as if you were never meant to remember it clearly. That's the first trick. Don't believe in distance. The road stretches, bends, folds into itself. You'll walk an hour and find yourself at the same fence post. You'll walk backward and end up further ahead. Time here is suggestion, not law. Your body tires, but not evenly. Your legs ache like they've crossed a continent, but your eyes remain wide, alert, too clear. Hunger fades, not from fullness but from confusion. You forget what food feels like, what chewing means. Water still matters. But the water you brought turns brackish. The canteen warms in your hand unnaturally fast. And when you finally find a creek, small, shallow, lined with white rocks, the water will be cold. Too cold. So cold it burns. Don't drink it all at once. Let your tongue remember slowly. If you find a traveler on the trail, don't speak first. Let them look at you. If they smile with only their mouth, keep moving. If they call you by name before you introduce yourself, stop immediately. Do not move. Do not breathe. Wait until they walk past. And whatever you do, don't look at their dao. If it moves after they've gone, you've been marked. Somewhere on the 4th day, or the 1st, or the 6th, time plays tricks. You'll find a wagon. Broken axle. One wheel spinning in the wind. No horses. No people. Just a child's bonnet hanging from the side. It's always there. Travelers say it's a mirage. Locals say it's a memory. But you'll smell lavender, and the wind will carry faint laughter. Don't investigate. The wagon's not real, but the consequence is, if you touch the bonnet, the sun will vanish. Instantly. And you'll learn what it means to be lost in a land with no night sounds. Only breath. Your breath. And one other. The landscape stretches, but markers remain. A twisted Joshua tree with a noose hanging from its limb. A fence gate that opens to nothing but rock. A sign that reads, Hollow End, 2 miles. Though there's no direction, if you follow the wind, you'll find the outpost, not a town. A place that was a town, burned out husks of homes. A saloon with a bar still standing but no roof. The piano keys still in place, though no walls remain. You'll hear music. Faint, but it's memory, not melody. A single figure might greet you. A woman in white, standing at the well. Don't approach. She's not waiting for water. She's waiting for a name. If you give her yours, she'll nod. You won't hear from her again. But the wind will start whispering your name through the ruins, and the sand will hold your footprints longer than it should. Don't stay until sundown. Hollow End doesn't cast normal shadows. They bend outward. They stretch toward you. Some say they try to match your steps. Others say they try to steal them. Either way, the sun sets fast there, like it's fleeing, like it doesn't want to witness what happens after. If you sleep, Do so in the saddle. Horses know what humans forget. They won't step where ghosts linger. They won't drink from cursed streams. They won't lie down where bones lie too shallow. Trust your horse more than your instincts. Your instincts are still tuned to a world with rules. This is not that world. Somewhere in that stretch between Hollow End and the canyon rim, you'll find the bones. Not scattered, arranged. Human, animal, something in between. Laid out in spirals, in shapes you almost recognize but can't name. Don't touch them. Don't step over them. Walk around. Wide berth. If a buzzard watches you, it's fine. If it follows you, speak its name aloud. Bird of ending, watcher of fall. Do not say it twice. It will remember. And it will remember you. By now, you will have forgotten your destination. That's by design. The West doesn't care where you meant to go, only where you end up. And if, in the distance, you see a light, a single lantern swinging in a cave mouth, you'll think it's safety, shelter, a place to rest. It is, but not for you. That lantern belongs to someone else, and the cave breathes. You'll hear it. Inhale, exhale, slow, patient, like it's waiting for you to step too close. If the earth under your boots begins to hum, stop. If it sings, run. If it laughs, pray, but not to your God. Pray to the West, not for mercy, but for memory. So that when you're gone, something might still remember your shape, your voice, your defiance, so that the sand doesn't win. Because that's what the desert wants. Not blood, not bone, but forgetting. And it's patient. So patient, you begin to notice that your thoughts no longer arrive in sequence. Memories rise from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. A girl's voice calling your name from decades ago. The smell of pine wood, though no trees have stood nearby for miles. The sensation of rain dripping down your back despite the cloudless sky above. This is how the West tests you. Not with hunger nor thirst, but with your own mind. You may come across a fork in the trail. There will be no signs, no landmarks, only the gentle rise of hills in both directions. If you hear a whistle from the left path, ignore it. Whistling is a trap. The locals say spirits can't speak, but they can mimic. They've learned the sound of train horns, of children laughing, of your own voice calling out in desperation. If you hear yourself calling from behind, do not turn around. That version of you is already too late. Keep walking, always forward. And should you find a silver coin on the ground, leave it. Do not pick it up. That's an offering meant for someone else. Taking it means you've accepted a bargain you don't understand, and the collector always arrives. Not soon, not loud, but always. Around noon, though it might not be noon, you'll see a rider in the distance. Black horse, rider dressed in mourning clothes. Wide-brimmed hat pulled low, no face visible. They will not approach. They will match your pace from a distance. You can stop. They'll stop. You can run. They'll stay behind you. But they will never disappear. This is the witness. Every traveler sees them once. If you wave, they will tip their hat. If you shoot, the bullet will vanish midair. If you ask a question, you will hear an answer hours later whispered from the trees. It won't be the answer you wanted, but it will be the one you feared. Do not try to be clever. The West respects honesty, not wit. Somewhere along the trail, you will smell smoke. Wood smoke, thick and earthy, tinged with something sweet. You'll think of campfires and safety. But there's no fire, not yet. You're catching the scent of one that burned long ago. A town gone wrong, a sheriff's mistake, a preacher's rage. The smell is memory charred into the air itself. Hold your breath. Count to 7. Keep walking. If your horse begins to refuse the path, trust it. Horses know. If it bucks, turn back. If it cries, dismount slowly, lower your head, and wait. Something's near. Maybe a spirit. Maybe something older. Maybe just a place where grief got stuck and never moved on. The Wild West holds more than cowboys and outlaws. It holds the echo of everything we tried to bury. The outlaw who cried as he died, the woman whose wedding was her funeral, the boy who never left the cave. They don't haunt, they persist, not out of vengeance, out of confusion. They were promised something: justice, love, escape, and got silence. The land keeps their stories because no one else did. You are walking through a library of unfinished tales. Be careful not to become one. If night falls while you're exposed, find high ground. Never sleep in a hollow, no matter how inviting. Cold air settles there, and with it, watchers. You won't see them. But if you feel a weight on your chest, like a blanket of air pressing too heavy, that's not exhaustion. That's something testing your breathing, wondering how easy it would be to stop it. Sleep in shifts. Wake every hour. Listen. If all is quiet, be afraid. The desert should never be silent. Crickets, coyotes, wind. These are signs of balance. Total silence means something's listening too hard. If you dream, and the dream feels real, that's because it is. The West doesn't separate dream from memory. If you see your mother and she looks younger than she was, don't follow her. If you see a building from your childhood, but the doors are too tall, do not enter. And if you find yourself back in the town you left and no one recognizes you, you didn't return. You just arrived where the road wants you. You may be tempted to follow a river. Don't. Rivers in the West don't behave. Some loop into themselves. Some vanish underground. Some lead you to places that remember violence too well. If you do drink, check your reflection. If your eyes blink out of sync, stop immediately. The river is pulling something from you. Step away. Dry off. Apologize to no one. Offer no explanation. Let the river forget you. There are messages carved into the rocks if you know where to look. Symbols older than letters. Spirals, dots. Lines like running men, they're warnings. Translations are guesses. But the common thread is clear. Do not stay long. Do not dig. Do not ask. The West hates questions more than crimes. It punishes curiosity. That's why so many of its towns disappear. Not because they failed, but because someone looked too closely. You'll pass through a gulch where bones decorate the cliffside like wind chimes. They rattle without breeze. That's not wind, it's memory. And the sound is telling a story in a language you don't know but almost understand. Don't translate. Let it speak. Let it pass. You are not meant to know everything. You only need to know when to listen and when to walk. There will be a moment brief, unmarked, where the landscape changes. Rocks smoother. Grass brighter, air clearer. You'll think you've made it through. You haven't. This is the eye of the storm, a place where the West pretends to be kind. It's offering you peace, but it's testing your gratitude. If you relax too much, you won't notice the return of the weight, the shift in shadows, the cold creeping in under your coat, and when you do notice, it will be too late. You'll already be somewhere you don't recognize, though you've passed it before. The trail you trusted has looped. The sun is in the wrong place. And behind you, the witness has drawn closer. You didn't see it happen. You never do. That's the second trick. The first was forgetting your path. The second is accepting you never had one. The West doesn't let you arrive. It lets you remain. Until you prove otherwise. Until you name something true. Until you surrender your cleverness and remember your smallness. Only then will the trail begin to open again. Only then will the road let you go. But not before asking you the question that every traveler hears at least once. The question you never hear aloud. Only feel. Like a weight in your lungs.
Why did you come here?
There is no right answer. But your answer determines whether the trail ends or begins again. There is a point where you will no longer recognize your own voice, where the rasp in your throat starts to sound like someone else. This is not illness. This is not fatigue. This is the desert reminding you that language is not native here. In the West, words are borrowed things. They do not belong to men. They belong to the wind, to the earth, to the bones buried beneath sagebrush and dust. If you must speak, do so softly. Loudness attracts echoes that don't return quite right. If your name is called from the hills and no one is near, resist the urge to answer. Names are powerful, and once the land learns yours, it might not let you leave. You will find a town eventually. They all do. A small settlement. 6 or 7 buildings leaning against time, a saloon with swinging doors, a church with no bell, a general store where everything is out of date yet nothing is dusty. No one greets you, no one stops you. That's how you know it's real. If they smile too wide or know your name before you speak, it's not a town. It's a memory pretending to be one. Step carefully. Real towns are tired, quiet, suspicious of newcomers. If you are offered bread, take it with both hands, and don't eat until the host nods. If you're given water, smell it first. If it's sweet, it's safe. If it's bitter, that's not water. That's a warning. Accept it. And move on. The sheriff might be there, or someone who says he is. Tall man, long coat, badge too shiny. He will ask where you came from. Do not say back east. That's too vague. Say the name of a real place. Something old. Something that no longer has a post office. He will nod slowly. If he asks why you're here, don't lie. Lies echo strangely in the West. Say you're passing through. Say you're looking for work. Say you're lost. That last one is safest. The lost are less threatening than the found. If he warns you about going out after dark, thank him and stay inside. Even if the building creaks, even if the floorboards whisper names in the night, you are safer there than under the sky. The stars are not your friends. They're eyes. They watch, and sometimes they blink. If you dream of horses speaking in human voices, it means the ground beneath your bed remembers an unburied secret. In the morning, leave a coin near the doorway. Any coin. The dead are old-fashioned. They respect payment. Never stay in a town more than one night. Hospitality here sours quickly. The longer you remain, the more the town begins to forget you were ever a visitor. You become part of the architecture. A chair that never gets moved. A coat that no one claims. A voice heard just beyond the edge of waking. Keep moving. Always. On your second week, the landscape changes again. Not drastically. Just enough to make you nervous. Rocks look too smooth. The wind tastes different, like metal and cloves. You'll come across a tree in the middle of nowhere. A hanging tree. You'll know it by the way birds refuse to land on it. There will be no rope, but the shadow of one. You'll feel it before you see it. A tightness in your neck. A weight between your shoulder blades. Walk around the tree. Do not pass under it. That's not superstition. That's respect. The land remembers executions. The tree remembers names. If you touch it, you might hear one whispered into your ear. It won't be yours. Yet. But it could be. Somewhere near this tree, there's a journal buried in a rusted tin box. It contains names, dates, and events that never made the newspapers. Crimes the law forgot. Regrets that never became confessions. If you find it, read only one page. Then bury it again. The West allows glimpses, not ownership. If you steal knowledge, it will reclaim it through your sleep, through your blood, through your voice. As you ride further, you may see dust devils in the distance. Small whirlwinds dancing across flat land. Do not approach. They are not weather. They are arguments between the past and present, still unresolved. If one crosses your path, spit into the dirt. Turn 3 times, continue. You are not welcome in that conversation. You might find a mirror nailed to a tree, cracked, old, facing outward. Do not look directly, glance only. Just enough to see if your reflection blinks when you do. If it doesn't, move on. Your shadow is still yours. But if it smiles, or gestures, or walks a quote away from you, you've been marked. You won't feel it immediately, but you will forget names. Your own thoughts will echo. You'll say a sentence, then realize you never spoke it. You'll feel watched, even when alone, especially when alone. The only cure is water from a spring that no longer exists. Some travelers try to draw it on maps. Others wander for decades. But most simply disappear. If you pass a man standing still in the open plain, facing away from the sun, do not speak to him. He's neither living nor dead. He's waiting. What for? No one knows. But he waits in silence, and the moment you interrupt, he remembers his task, and it will involve you. If you hear a child crying from a covered wagon, approach with caution. If the wagon is intact with fresh tracks, it's real. If it's broken, decaying, and the cry continues unchanged, leave. That sound is bait. The West tests your compassion. Fail, and it punishes. Pass, and it remembers, not kindly, not cruelly, just remembers. And memory here is currency. The sun will begin to behave strangely around your third week, rising too quickly, setting behind clouds that weren't there before. At noon, it will cast shadows too long. At dusk, they vanish. This is a liminal phase. You are near a threshold, not geographic, temporal. If you see a doorway in the side of a hill-carved stone, dark entry, do not enter. That's not a cave, it's a shortcut. And shortcuts in the West don't save time. They spend it. Some who enter return days later, aged years. Others forget their language. One man returned fluent in birdsong, unable to speak anything else. He chirped his wife's name until his throat bled. Stay on the path, no matter how twisted, no matter how cruel. The straight road is not always safest, but it is understood. If you find a gun buried in the sand, do not touch it. Guns remember. They hold grudges. That one was buried for a reason. If you pick it up, it will whisper a name to you. You will feel compelled to seek that person. Even if they're dead, even if they never existed, the need will root in your bones. That's how stories begin. That's how they trap you. That's how you become a ghost. One night soon, you will wake to find someone sitting at your fire. Not hostile, not friendly, just present. They won't speak. They'll just watch. Offer them coffee. If they drink, you're safe. If they stare, you're being measured. If they smile, pack your things and leave before dawn. You don't want to know what they're smiling about. The West is not cruel, but it is old, and old places are patient. They do not rush judgment. They wait, and in waiting, they gather. The sounds, the stories, the skin cells you leave behind, the footprints that don't match your shoes. It all becomes part of the record. And one day, long after you've left, someone will pass through and find a trace of you. A name carved in bark, a coat button, a song hummed in their ear when no one is near. And they'll ask the question, who walked this path before me? And the West will answer, quietly, accurately, without sentiment, because it never forgets. Not what you did, not why you came, only that you were here once, and now you're part of it. Whether you meant to be or not, by now you will have stopped asking how you got here. The dust has entered your thoughts, your fingers have become unfamiliar with softness, and your dreams are no longer your own. They belong to this place, and in them, you ride without a destination, you eat without hunger, and you sleep without rest. This is the West's way of holding you gently at first, then completely. You may find yourself becoming quieter, not because of fear, but reverence. You speak only when necessary. Your boots creak less. Your shadow stays close. You begin to understand the subtle rhythm of survival. When to keep riding, when to dig for water, when to disappear behind silence. But understand this, familiarity is not safety. The West rewards learning, not comfort. The moment you think you belong, it will remind you harshly, thoroughly that you are still a guest. The first sign will come in sound, a whistle, but not from a bird. High-pitched, wavering, impossible to place. It might come from a hill, from behind a rock, from inside your own canteen. If you hear it, pause. Not out of caution, out of politeness. It's not a threat, it's a notice. Something is about to shift. When you continue, you will find the landscape has changed, not just physically, spiritually. Colors will seem richer, smells sharper. Even the wind will feel different, as though watching you. Do not panic. These moments are thresholds. Walk through them like you would through a church. Slow, respectful, listening. You may stumble upon a trail marked with stones. Perfect circles, each exactly the size of your fist. They were not placed by hands. They mark a boundary between what the land tolerates and what it forbids. Do not cross without permission. How do you ask permission? You stop. You sit. You wait, not for a sign, but for a feeling. You will know when it's granted. The air will lift. The wind will pass behind your ears. The ground will warm slightly beneath you. Only then do you stand and proceed. If you ignore this and cross anyway, you may not notice the consequence immediately. But things will forget you. Your horse might stop responding to your touch. Your fire might refuse to catch. Even your name, when spoken aloud, might sound wrong. That is not punishment. That is erasure. And once you are forgotten by the West, even memory cannot call you back. Somewhere beyond those circles, you will see a house. Alone, unpainted, still. It will seem abandoned. It's not. No building in the West is truly empty. They all carry something. Voices, secrets, regrets. This one will call to you not audibly, but with familiarity. You will feel like you've been there before. You haven't. That's the trap. If you enter, leave something at the door. A coin, a tooth, a word whispered into the frame. Anything to remind the structure that you are not prey. Inside, there may be rooms. Too many for the outside to account for. You might hear footsteps above you when the house has only one floor. Do not investigate. Curiosity is what built the West. It is also what buried it. If you must explore, count your steps on the way in. Match them exactly on the way out. If you come up short, leave something behind your belt, your glove, your breath. It's a trade. The house will honor it. If it doesn't, you will feel it. An itch in your teeth. A tightness in your lungs. Leave then, quickly. The house has changed its mind. Outside, the sky may appear too blue. This is not beauty. This is imbalance. When the sky becomes too perfect, it means the land has taken something it shouldn't have. The balance must be restored. You may be the offering. You must move. Fast. South, if possible. West is danger. East is memory. North is regret. South is uncertainty, but it's yours to shape. On this route, you may meet others. Not many, but a few. Travelers, like you. Some real, some not. You will not know the difference until they speak. If their voice echoes too far, they are memory. If their eyes do not blink, they are warning. If their hands are warm, they are alive. Offer them your name, but not your story. Stories are currency. Spend them wisely. One may offer you a map, hand-drawn, stained with something unidentifiable. If it contains rivers that run uphill or forests that move, take it. That's not error. That's truth. This map is not of the land. It is of understanding. It will guide you, not geographically, but spiritually. It may lead you to a place called the Crossing. No one knows what it is. A town? A moment? A choice? All of these. None of them. But if you reach it, you'll know. The air there smells like the end of summer. The light is always twilight, and music plays faintly from no source. If you stay too long, you may forget why you left. You may forget you ever arrived. People who disappear often disappear here, smiling, content, lost. If you wish to remain, lie down. The ground will accept you. The earth here is soft, forgiving. If you wish to continue, walk backward for 20 steps. The world will resume, but something inside you will have changed. Forever, the final test of this journey will come in silence. One night, there will be no wind, no insects, not even your own breath. You will sit by your fire and realize the flames make no sound. You will hear nothing. Not absence of noise, absence of permission. This is the moment the West evaluates you. Not your strength, not your speed, your essence, who you were before, who you are now, and who you might become. Sit still. Do not speak. Do not move. Let the silence take its measure. If it finds you wanting, you will feel cold not in your skin, but in your bones. A permanent cold, one that travels with you. If it finds you worthy, sound will return all at once, a bird, a crackle. your own breath. You will cry, though you won't know why. And from that moment on, the West will no longer test you. It will guide you. With signs so subtle only the transformed can see. A crow that lands twice. A tumbleweed that rolls against the wind. A patch of grass that stays green in a sea of gold. These are your guides now. Follow them. Trust them. They know the path. And they know where you're meant to go, even if you don't. Especially if you don't. To truly understand the horror veiled behind the sacred elegance of the ancient ritual, one must look not to what was done, but to what was never undone. The ritual, by its nature, was irreversible. It was never intended to be completed like a rite of passage, a threshold crossed once and left behind. No, it lingered, like smoke in the lungs, like a scent on the fingers that water could not wash away. The initiate, once touched by the voice beyond the veil, was marked not visibly, not ritually, but fundamentally. Something within them had been seen, spoken to, and most chillingly heard. The priests did not speak of this openly. Their scrolls avoid the question. But in rare fragments, we find mentions of the humming beneath the ribs, or the glimmer in the sand that follows. And in the margins, in faded ink, always the same phrase. He was looked upon. This passive construction is not accidental. The terror was not in what the priest did, but in what was done to him. To be seen by a god was not a blessing. It was a distortion. For days afterward, initiates would avoid reflective surfaces, not from shame, but because they no longer recognized what stared back. In a world governed by order, balance, truth, such distortions were dangerous. They threatened the foundation of all things, which is why the ritual was confined, kept secret, bound to conditions so specific that any deviation would lead not to divine insight, but collapse. There are legends of cities swallowed in a single night. Ombos, per autumn, sa netcher, places that appear in early maps but no longer exist. Some say they became the sites of failed listenings, where the god responded, but too strongly, where the veil tore instead of bent, where the voice did not whisper but screamed, and when the scream came, nothing could stand. Structures melted like wax, sand turned to glass, time buckled. Survivors, if any, were never the same. One tale speaks of a scribe who emerged alone from the ruins of Sa Netger, skin darkened as if burned from within, eyes wide and unblinking. He could only say one word, over and over, again. That word was feared more than any curse, because it implied repetition, that the ritual, once awakened, could repeat itself by will or accident. And this is perhaps the most chilling truth of all. The ritual is not merely an act. It is a memory. It remembers itself. And like all living memories, it can return. Not because someone performs it, but because someone thinks it. A chant does not need to be recited aloud. A posture does not need to be struck. All it takes is the shape of the idea, the echo of the desire to reach. And then, the god leans closer. This is why, even today, certain temple bas-reliefs are kept covered. Why archaeologists who unearth specific altars are asked not to describe them in detail. Why some museums quietly withdraw artifacts without explanation. Not for politics, not for preservation, but for containment. The ritual, they fear, may not be dead, only sleeping. And if it dreams in our direction, it may wake. In the time of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who abandoned the gods for the singular Aten, there was an attempt to suppress the ritual completely. His priests raided sanctuaries, burned texts, sealed chambers. They believed that by destroying the voices, they would silence the god. But they were mistaken. You cannot unhear what the soul has heard. You cannot unsee what the void has shown. In fact, it was during Akhenaten's reign that the most intense visitations were reported. Entire processions halted mid-step, statues weeping salt water, infants born with sigils etched into their skin, sigils that faded before sunrise. Akhenaten himself began to deteriorate. His features elongated, his eyes widened, He claimed to hear music no one else could. And in his final days, he spoke only in rhymes, verses that no scholar since has fully translated. His death was not natural. It was containment. A ritual within a ritual, one meant not to mourn, but to imprison. Some whisper that his body was not buried, but scattered. Each bone sealed in a different temple, a desperate attempt to break the link between body and voice. And yet his memory remains vibrant, distorted, a mirror, not a portrait, just like the gods he tried to silence. The obsession with secrecy among the ancient priests was not superstition. It was survival. They knew what they dealt with, knew the cost. The gods did not offer clarity, they offered contact. And contact, for a mortal, is rarely kind. Even in the modern era, echoes persist. A linguist in the 1970s reportedly collapsed after attempting to translate a glyph found beneath Luxor, one shaped like a spiral inside a mouth. His final notes, written on the back of a receipt, simply said, "It is listening." A filmmaker who used ritual chants as soundtrack motifs died in a fire that left no trace of accelerants. The footage was lost. But those who heard early samples claimed the audio caused headaches, nausea, and in one case, temporary blindness. These are not myths. These are shadows cast by a ritual that refuses to be forgotten. And the deeper one looks, the closer it comes. Not physically, not spatially, but emotionally, intellectually. It draws the curious inward, not with force, but invitation. The same invitation extended thousands of years ago in the black halls beneath the Nile. Come see, come hear, come know. But the knowing does not stop. It spreads. And what begins as a question, "Can I speak to the divine?" becomes a wound that never heals, a door that never closes. And behind that door, a voice still waits, not to be worshipped, but to be answered. By now, if you had not succumbed to fever, drought, or lead, your senses would have been rewired. You'd walk differently, not just with caution, but with calculation. Every door you approached was a wager. Every glance exchanged with a stranger carried weight. If a man tipped his hat to you, you'd gauge whether it was habit or a test. Even your dreams would no longer be yours. They'd be landscapes of gunfire and dust, replaying near deaths and close calls and the smell of burning hair from when a lantern tipped too close to a sleeping roll. The Wild West was a memory factory that didn't ask permission. You would have learned the terrain like a second language. Cactus meant water sometimes. A crooked tree might mark an old trail or a hanging site. Buzzards circled truths. Coyotes followed travelers too long and too close. You'd start to see messages in tracks, in broken twigs, in how long smoke rose from a chimney. Were they cooking or signaling? You didn't ask out loud. You learned to answer questions with your eyes, your silence, your hand hovering subtly over your belt. Cities like Dodge or Tombstone weren't places, they were moods, living rumors. Some men claimed to find fortune there. Others were found face down in alleys, boots missing, names forgotten. In one town, a man might be sheriff, saloon owner, undertaker, and debtor all in one. The lines blurred. And when you finally entered a town, the buildings didn't welcome you, they assessed you. The swing of saloon doors was a heartbeat, slow, measured. And behind those doors, you'd find more than whiskey. You'd find hunger dressed in velvet, vengeance in pinstripes, and greed beneath polished boots. And yet, somehow, this place functioned. Trade moved, wagons crossed trails, marriages were held in dusty chapels while gunmen leaned on pews, hats in hand, and children played games with names like Hangman's Hill or Sheriff's Luck. You'd pass a woman in black, veil drawn, her eyes locked to yours for a second too long, and you'd feel something tug at your soul. Was she grieving or hunting? Did she just bury her husband or make it look like an accident? Morality here wasn't binary. It was a shade of gray bleached by the sun. The righteous might kill. The wicked might pray. You'd meet men who shot to protect, and men who quoted scripture after spilling blood. There was no logic, only rhythm. A dry, cracking rhythm like boots on gravel, like spurs on hardwood, like a hammer cocked just out of sight. And food, if you had any, wasn't flavor. It was survival. Hardtack, jerky, beans boiled until the pot nearly cracked. Coffee so bitter it felt like chewing smoke. You'd crave anything green, anything fresh. But those things didn't grow here, not easily. And not for long. You might barter a month's wages for an orange, or shoot a man for a loaf of bread and still sleep soundly. And perhaps the cruelest part was this: the sky was always beautiful. Stars sprawled without shame, the moon so wide it felt like a watchful god. Sunsets bled over mountains like spilled wine. And in that beauty was a terrible reminder that the world didn't care. The West didn't mourn, it moved on. Graves grew weeds, names faded, stories twisted. And if you vanished, devoured by desert, stabbed behind a cantina, lost in a canyon storm, no one would come looking. Because to live here was to understand that loss was currency, grief was common, and forgetting was a kindness. So you would walk, one hand near your weapon, one eye on the horizon, and both feet knowing that to stop was to surrender. Because in the Wild West of 1865, survival was not about strength. It was about endurance. Endurance of pain, of heat, of silence. And perhaps, most of all, of yourself. You'd think the law would be your salvation. That somewhere amidst the chaos, a sheriff or a circuit judge would stand firm, a symbol of... In a land where rules were often written after the fact, people learned quickly that symbols of authority were not always what they seemed. A badge, dulled and weathered, didn't mean fairness, it meant someone survived long enough to wear it. Most lawmen hadn't been chosen, they had simply lasted longer in the chaos. Jailhouses stood more as storage sheds than places of order, and justice wasn't impartial. It blinked in the sunlight, made quick decisions, and followed convenience more than principle. If you were lucky, the local enforcer had a clear head. If not, confusion could place you on the wrong side of a locked door. And if you happened to upset someone with influence, that authority might simply forget you existed. Legal buildings looked the part: benches, desks, robes, but within those walls, voices were louder than evidence, and conclusions were drawn long before any statements were made. If you couldn't afford influence, you relied on speed. Because decisions weren't always guided by what was true, but by who was nearby and who could speak for you. When a group of citizens decided something was wrong, action was often immediate. Sometimes those actions became community events, framed as justice. And while some moments brought hope when someone brave made the right choice, when someone honest followed the rules, those moments were brief. Because power often had deeper roots than fairness. Behind every figure of order was someone with their own history, their own debts, their own priorities. Even gatherings meant to uphold law were often decided in advance, in quiet corners, far from any official place. If you truly needed safety, you turned to someone close, not an office, not a title, but a person. Loyalty meant more than coins, and betrayal wasn't easily forgotten. The contrast between those who claimed the law and those who resisted it wasn't always clear. Both had force, both had speed, both acted without delay. The difference was in whose name they spoke, and even that could change. People whispered about the ones who vanished, only to appear elsewhere with new roles, new titles, new stories. What was true depended on who remembered and what version they told. So people kept to themselves. They didn't raise their voice. They paid attention to every detail: how someone moved, how they spoke, what they carried. And when new faces arrived wearing symbols of order, most didn't cheer. They waited. Because in that world, the idea of justice wasn't a rule. It was a comfort story. And those who had seen too much knew better. They knew that justice didn't always arrive with kindness, and it didn't speak softly. Towns looked calm from a distance. You'd see tidy streets, steady fences, buildings lined in rows. But walking closer, cracks showed. Doors had extra locks. Curtains stayed drawn. Faces glanced quickly, then away. Every community had its structure, but it wasn't about elections or titles. It was about presence, about who others noticed when they entered a room. The ones who made decisions weren't always on a platform. Sometimes they poured drinks. Sometimes they kept ledgers. And if you didn't know who they were, the town would teach you quietly and without asking. Maybe your words would be ignored. Maybe your belongings would vanish. Maybe you'd sense, without being told, that your welcome had an expiration. A person's name meant more than any paper. If no one recognized yours, they filled in the blanks. And not kindly. Strangers were watched, not greeted. And if they lingered, the silence deepened. Questions followed, but not the open kind. The kind that came with glances, with careful tones, with a weight that didn't need to be explained. Ends. And if your answers didn't satisfy them, you might find your room ransacked, your saddle cut, your name whispered behind doors you'd never be invited through. Saloon doors were never closed, but they weren't open either. You could drink, sure. You could sit at the end of the bar, nurse a watered-down whiskey, and pretend you belonged. But the real conversations, the ones that mattered, happened in the back room, behind curtains, between men who never raised their voices because they never had to. The piano might play, the girls might laugh, but underneath it all was tension. A thrum of violence waiting to be activated, a poker game gone sideways, a glance held too long, a name mispronounced. And then, without warning, the music would stop. The guns would come out, and the floor would soak red. Church bells didn't ring for mass. They rang for warnings, for fires, for funerals. Children weren't taught scripture first. They were taught how to run, how to lie, how to hide. The preacher might bless your baby on Sunday and bury your husband by Tuesday, and the cemetery grew, row by row, marker by marker, most with no names, just wooden crosses and stories no one wanted to tell. You'd think you could leave. Just mount your horse and ride to the next town. But word traveled faster than hoofbeats. If you made enemies here, they'd be waiting there. And if you ran, you'd only mark yourself as prey. So you learned to adapt. You spoke less, you watched more. You picked your allies with care, and you never forgot a slight. Because in these towns, forgiveness was weakness, and weakness got you killed. The general store sold more than flour and nails. It sold gossip. It sold alliances. A sack of sugar to the wrong person could get you watched. A kind word to the right widow could buy you a friend, or an enemy. And the school teacher? She might seem harmless, but she knew every secret, every affair, every betrayal whispered in a child's ear and repeated at recess. If you wanted to survive a town in 1865, you had to be part of it, but never too much. You had to matter, but not too loudly. You had to disappear in plain sight. Because in the Wild West, towns weren't refuge. They were crucibles. And only the ones who knew how to burn without turning to ash ever made it out alive. There were no maps that told the truth. The parchment folded in your saddlebag might show a road, a river, a cluster of buildings labeled as a town. But that didn't mean the road wasn't flooded, the river wasn't dry, or the town wasn't full of graves. Cartographers in 1865 did not travel, they guessed. They copied. They etched lines onto paper based on stories passed around campfires and tales shared between whiskey breaths. And if you trusted that map, if you followed it without question, you might find yourself riding into nothingness, into canyons with no exit, into forests that breathed at night, into places even the natives refused to name. Geography was a suggestion. Terrain was a trap. You could ride for days under a sun that blistered your skin and still be no closer to where you thought you were going. You could drink the water from a creek and feel fine until morning came and your gut twisted like a rope. And then there were the animals, not the ones you expect, not just snakes or wolves or mountain lions, but insects that carried fevers, bats that flew at your face in mines long abandoned, cattle that stampeded not because of a threat, but because of a scent yours. You'd tie your horse to a tree, thinking it safe, only to return and find hoofprints heading nowhere and silence pressing down like a punishment. And walking? That was surrender. Every mile walked was a mile declared to the land that you didn't belong. The Wild West had no patience for those on foot. You either rode or you vanished. The weather changed like tempers. One moment the sky was open, blue, endless. The next it was choking with dust, with hail, with lightning that cracked so close your vision went white. Rain didn't fall, it attacked. Thunder didn't echo, it stalked. And when it cleared, when the silence returned, it wasn't peace, it was a warning. You'd find tracks in the mud that hadn't been there before, or worse, tracks that matched your own, but you didn't remember walking that way. And then came the solitude, that terrible, echoing solitude. It wasn't the absence of people that made it unbearable. It was the awareness that the land was watching, that the silence was listening, that your thoughts were not entirely your own. Men spoke to themselves not from madness, but from necessity, to hear a voice, any voice, even if it was your own, distorted by wind and fear. Fires were never just for warmth, they were for light, for proof. Because darkness in the West wasn't empty, it was full of noises you couldn't explain, full of rustles that stopped the moment you turned your head, full of shadows that didn't match the moon's direction. If you survived the night, you counted it, like a coin, like a scar, a small victory in a war no one declared. Because in the Wild West of 1865, the land didn't need to kill you to win it, only needed to make you forget who you were, one sunrise at a time. The West did not forgive liars, but it was built on lies. Men lied about their names, their pasts, their reasons for coming west. Women lied about their ages, their marital status, their intentions. Everyone lied about their fears. And the land listened to every one of those lies with indifferent silence, as if daring them to speak louder, bolder, until the truth unraveled not in words, but in consequences. If you claimed to be a gunslinger and weren't, your hand would tremble at the wrong moment, and someone quicker would send you to the dust. If you claimed to be a doctor but had never cut flesh outside a butcher's shop, your patients would die screaming, and their kin would come for you in the night. And if you claimed to be a preacher while your eyes hunted women at every tavern, you'd be found one morning with your mouth sewn shut and a Bible nailed to your chest. Reputation traveled faster than horses. It passed from saloon to saloon, whispered in poker games, scribbled on wanted posters, etched into memories that never forgot a face. If you had done something terrible in Arkansas, you might think you could escape it in Arizona, but a trader who'd heard a story in Texas might recognize the way you limped or the scar above your brow, and that was enough. Enough to summon suspicion. Enough to make a barkeep serve you with his hand below the counter. Enough to make a deputy walk behind you a little too close. Lies weren't just told, they were hunted. You had to learn when to speak and when to stay silent. You had to master the art of omission. Say just enough to be human, but never enough to be known. Because the moment someone knew you in the West, they owned a part of you. And people in the West didn't own things gently. They used them, twisted them, turned knowledge into leverage, and leverage into threat. So you'd find yourself crafting a version of yourself with care, like shaping a saddle strong where it needed to be, worn where it was believable. You'd say you were a rancher, though you'd never touched a cow. You'd say your wife died of fever when the truth was darker. You'd say you were headed to California when you had no intention of ever leaving the canyon where your sin slept shallow beneath the dirt. And still, it might not be enough, because there were those who could smell lies like smoke, old women with eyes like ash, boys who asked too many questions, drifters who sat quiet at campfires and listened more than they spoke. They'd smile when you lied, nod, let you finish, and you'd feel safe until you woke up tied to a tree with your boots missing and your horse gone. In the West, the truth didn't set you free, it set others upon you. But lies, they kept you moving. And sometimes, moving was the only kind of safety left. So you polished your story, rehearsed it under your breath, changed it slightly in every town. Learned to lie not only with words, but with posture, with breath, with silence. Until you almost believed it yourself. Until the only truth you remembered was the one you'd invented. And by then, it didn't matter. Because the man you'd once been, the one who'd left home, scared and honest, was long gone, buried beneath the dust of the trail, forgotten like an unpaid debt. The West didn't forgive liars, but it gave them a place to disappear. The West did not sleep. Not really. At night the towns pretended, windows shuttered, lanterns dimmed, dogs curled tight in corners. But behind every slatted door and curtain, eyes watched, guns waited. People in the West didn't trust the dark. They knew what it could hold. A man riding into town past midnight wasn't visiting family. A knock after sundown wasn't a friendly neighbor. And if you heard footsteps on your porch after the saloon had closed, you didn't answer. You loaded your weapon and prayed it wasn't someone you used to know. Sleep was shallow. It came in breaths, not hours. A few minutes here, stolen under a blanket that still smelled like dust and sweat. A few minutes there, slumped in a chair, boots on, hat pulled low. No one undressed fully. No one unbuckled their belt. Even in the supposed safety of 4 wooden walls, a man had to be ready. Ready to shoot. Ready to run. Ready to vanish. And if you weren't, you didn't last. The stories of men dragged out of bed and strung up before dawn weren't myths, they were lessons. A reminder that comfort was dangerous. That softness invited death. So you learned to rest with one eye open, with a knife beneath your pillow, with your mind half in the room, half on the door. Women, too, became light sleepers. Not from choice, but from necessity. A creak on the floorboards could mean a drunk husband, or a stranger, or a neighbor who had mistaken kindness for invitation. Mothers slept with their babies tucked into their chests, listening not only for cries, but for silence, because silence could mean fever or something worse. And when storms came hard, desert rains or northern winds that rattled the boards loose, no one truly slept. They sat up, counting seconds between thunderclaps, watching the walls shift, praying the roof would hold. Children were taught not lullabies, but warnings. Don't drink strange water. Don't eat berries near the red rocks. Don't follow anyone who says they know your name. Even rest had rules. Even dreams had borders. Some men avoided sleep entirely, fueled by tobacco, whiskey, and fear. They claimed it was to keep watch over their cattle, their land, their wives. But everyone knew the truth. Those were the men who had done something. Something they couldn't face when the world quieted, the kind of something that came back in dreams, sweaty and sharp. And so they stayed awake, night after night, until their eyes went red and their hands shook and their words made no sense. But even then, they feared sleep more than madness. The land didn't help. Coyotes howled in pairs, echoing through canyon walls. Winds played tricks, mimicking voices you hadn't heard in years. Trees groaned like old bones. And the stars, so many and so bright, made you feel exposed, like God was watching but not intervening. Sleep in the West was like trust rare, dangerous, and not to be given lightly. So you learned to close your eyes the way you holstered your gun, with practice, tension, and one hand always near the trigger. And if, by some miracle, you did fall fully asleep, deep, warm, dreaming sleep, you woke up confused, vulnerable, exposed, because real rest was a memory from another life, a life before the West, a life that didn't follow you here. They said that if you survived your first year in the West, you could survive anything, but that was a lie, a comfort passed between men who hadn't yet buried their second son, who hadn't watched winter turn a whole family into statues around a fire that never caught flame, who hadn't seen a stranger walk into town with a smile and leave with someone's life still warm on their hands. Because survival wasn't about endurance, it was about luck, timing, instinct, and knowing when to lie, cheat, or run. And if you thought it was about honor, you'd be 6 feet under before spring. And if you thought it was about fairness, the West would correct you fast. Because here, fairness was a story preachers told to dying men, and justice came not from courts but from ropes, bullets, and burned barns. So you didn't ask for fairness, you asked for distance, for dry ground, for a horse that wouldn't throw you and a rifle that wouldn't jam. You asked for a mouth that knew when to shut and a face that didn't draw attention. And most of all, you asked to be left alone Because in the West, privacy was survival, invisibility was armor, and even kindness was a risk. Because favors were remembered, and debts were tracked, not in ledgers, but in scars and missing teeth. And that hollow way a man looked at you when he owed too much, when he was deciding whether to pay it back or bury the balance. And so you kept your circle small, if you had one at all, and you learned to read the wind, to smell the change in air before a storm or a shootout, to hear the tension in a saloon when a new voice entered or a familiar one went quiet. And you never sat with your back to the door, never trusted a man who didn't drink, never let a woman close unless you were prepared to fight for her or leave her behind, because everything in the West had weight, consequence, history. Even your boots, they told stories in the mud they left behind, in the creak of your step, in the blood they tracked over floorboards when things went wrong, and things often went wrong, not because you made mistakes, but because someone else did. And air mistake found you like heat finds a match, sudden and unstoppable. And when it did, you didn't reason, you didn't beg, you didn't look for a marshal, you acted, fast and brutal and without apology, because apologies were for cities and childhoods, not for land where mercy was a weakness and hesitation was a death sentence. And maybe that's why the old men didn't talk much, why their eyes stayed low and their hands shook when no one was watching, because they had survived, yes, but not clean, not whole. And survival in the West meant carrying ghosts, memories that bit like frost in the heat of summer, that whispered in the rattling of dry leaves, that waited in the quiet between gunshots and thunder. And so they whittled, they drank, they stared, they watched the world forget them while they remembered everything. And if you asked them what they'd do differently, they'd never answer. Not because they didn't know, but because it didn't matter. Because the West didn't care for regrets, only outcomes. And if you were lucky enough to get old, to sit with bad knees and worse lungs on a porch built with your own hands, then you didn't waste breath on what should have been. You watched the road, the horizon, the sun slipping behind mountains that never forgave, and you kept your rifle close. Not out of fear, but out of memory, out of habit, out of something deeper than words. And you listened not for danger, but for the silence that followed, the silence that told you you were still here, still breathing, still in the West. There was a saying passed from outlaw to rancher, from barkeep to bounty hunter, from the whispering lips of stagecoach guards to the leathered mouths of old Apache scouts who had watched more blood soak into dust than rainfall ever could. And that saying was this: if you rise before the sun in the West and your boots hit the ground without regret, you're already luckier than most. Because out here, mornings weren't fresh starts. They were trials, another chance for the land to test you, to bleed you, to bury you under names it didn't bother remembering. And if you thought dawn meant peace, you hadn't seen how shadows play tricks before the light takes hold, how every shape on the ridge might be a deer or a desperado, how even birds flew low and quiet like they knew better than to call attention. Because silence wasn't absence here, it was warning. And every seasoned rider knew that the quieter the prairie, the closer death had crept. Wearing moccasins or boots or hooves or bare feet so light, they didn't even press prints into the sand. And so you learned not to trust quiet, and you learned not to trust noise either, because sound could be a lure, a rattle in the brush, a whistle where no mouth should be. A distant shout meant to pull you from cover so a bullet could find your chest before your curiosity even opened your mouth. And so trust itself became a casualty, a luxury you couldn't afford, like shade in midday or clean water that didn't taste of iron or rot. And out here, you measured time not by clocks, but by aches, by the slow blink of heat waves off the horizon, by the way your horse's ears tilted, by the way your hand never strayed far from your belt, even when you pissed or prayed. And maybe that's why religion out here didn't sound like church. There were no bells, no robes, just mumbled pleas into hats and gravel and sky, prayers to survive, not to be forgiven. Because guilt didn't matter if you were dead, and the West didn't care if you were good, only if you were fast. And every man who tried to be both ended up slow, and slow meant dead. And so boys who came out with Bibles in their saddlebags ended up using the pages for fire starter, and girls who thought they'd sing hymns ended up learning how to gut a deer and load a revolver before they even bled their first month. Because you adapted or you vanished, and vanishing didn't mean some romantic fading into the sunset. It meant your bones picked clean by coyotes, your name traded in poker games as a warning, your story rewritten by the last man who saw you breathing, and he'd get it wrong too, because memory here wasn't sacred. It was opportunistic, a tool for legend and leverage, and that's why the saloons were full of liars. Men who'd never shot a gun telling stories of shootouts, boys who'd never left town pretending they rode with Jesse James, and every lie earned them a drink or a night with a woman, or just a few minutes of not being invisible. Because invisibility was safer, yes, but it was also lonely, and even the hardest bastards wanted someone to know they'd been here, even if that someone was drunk and half asleep, even if the story ended in a laugh instead of a eulogy. And in that way, the West was honest. It made you choose what mattered more. Safety or recognition, breath or legacy, and most chose breath, though they lied and said otherwise. And that's the truth no one wants to admit about this land. This time, this myth, no one wanted to die for glory. They just didn't want to die alone. And so they built towns not for prosperity, but for proximity, for sound, for the illusion of safety in numbers. And maybe sometimes it worked. Maybe a lantern-lit window kept a wolf away. Maybe a voice from the next room kept the barrel from your mouth. Maybe a hand on your shoulder reminded you that you weren't just a ghost waiting to be buried, but more often, towns just made the dying messier, louder, more public, and in some ways that was worse, because out on the trail at least, death was yours, private and quick. But in town it was spectacle, a lesson, a warning etched into the boardwalk with blood and chalk, and if you were unlucky enough to be remembered, your name would hang from lips like tobacco spit, frequent, careless, bitter, and you'd become a reason for some father to say, "Don't end up like him," and some mother to whisper, "Stay away from that saloon," and some preacher to sweat harder under his collar, but not one of them would know who you really were. Not one of them would know the nights you didn't kill when you could have, the children you fed when you had none, the woman you loved in silence, because saying it would have made her a target. And so the truth of you would rot beneath the fiction, and your grave, if it had a marker, would misspell your name. And maybe that's why you carved it into trees when you passed them, initials on bark, not for anyone else, but for you. A way to say I was here, I lived, I tried. Even if no one remembers. You wouldn't last long out here if you didn't understand how the land itself shaped the men who walked on it. Because the West wasn't just a place, it was a force, an influence, a law unto itself. And if you came from the cities with your soft boots and softer expectations, you'd feel it. The moment the wind touched your skin, not like a breeze but like a challenge, as if the land was asking whether you belonged here. And most didn't, not for long. Not once the sun began its work, blistering everything in sight from wagon wheels to the skin on your neck and arms, peeling it back like bark from a dying tree. And even if you thought you could handle the heat, you hadn't yet met the silence that came after the wind died down, because that silence was a kind of judgment. It pressed against your thoughts, your fears, your memories, and made you hear them louder. Made you face the versions of yourself you'd kept buried under city noise and distraction. And when the silence ended, it wasn't peace. It was warning, because nothing stayed still in the West for long. And when something did, it usually meant it was watching you, or waiting for you, or worse, remembering you, and that's the thing most people didn't understand. The land remembered it, carried grudges and dust devils and promises and river bends. It swallowed the careless and revealed the patient. And if you didn't treat it with respect, it didn't forgive. And neither did its creatures, coyotes that howled just beyond firelight, like they were laughing at your fragility, or vultures circling, even when you were healthy, like They knew better, like they'd seen enough men fall to recognize the prelude to death and the horses. They weren't just animals, they were mirrors. They could smell cowardice and feel hesitation, and a bad rider didn't last long, not because he got thrown, but because the land made sure his journey never ended. The way he planned, and even the trees were sparse, like judges spread far apart, so each could bear witness without interference, and in that space between them, you felt it, the weight of stories, untold of warnings, ignored of bones buried shallow, not out of laziness, but as reminders. And if you ever stopped long enough, you'd see the signs not carved in wood or stone, but in rusted nails, in abandoned cabins, in the way trails, just disappeared into nothing, like even the dirt had moved on. And that's when the fear settled. Not the fear of bandits or snakes, but the deeper one. The fear that maybe this land didn't want you, maybe it would never let you belong. Maybe your presence here was tolerated, not welcomed. And the men who survived didn't conquer the land, they cooperated with it. They listened, they watched, they adjusted. They let go of the idea of control and embraced the rhythm of unpredictability. They learned which clouds meant flash, floods, and which meant nothing. They could track a storm by scent, a herd by silence, a death by birds, and that awareness, that attunement wasn't spiritual. It was practical, because anything less meant you died, and the ones who lived long enough to teach others. They never spoke in absolutes. They told stories in circles, let you draw your own conclusions. Because the West didn't care for certainty. It demanded humility, and even then, it took more than it gave. And when it gave, it wasn't comfort, it was endurance a day without loss a meal. Without sickness, a night without blood. And if you were smart, you celebrated those things, not with whiskey or song, but with stillness. A moment to feel your pulse, your breath, your continued presence. And when someone asked how you made it this far, you didn't say luck. You said listening, watching, adjusting, and most of all, remembering, because the land did, and so must. If you survived long enough to see the patterns, you'd understand that nothing in the Wild West happened by chance, because every creak of a door, every snapped twig, every shadow that moved too slow had meaning, and those who didn't learned the language of the land, often vanished from it. Swallowed without ceremony and unremembered by name, only recalled by warning. And this was especially true in the towns, not the ones drawn neatly on maps, but the real towns. The ones that rose from desperation and ambition, from the need to mine, trade, or hide. And in those towns, the air was thicker, not from smoke or dust, but from tension. It clung to you, followed you into the saloon, hovered above your bed, and reminded you that every man had something to prove or something to hide, and sometimes both. And the moment you stepped onto the main street, you could feel the hierarchy. It wasn't written on signs or stitched into uniforms. It was spoken in posture, in glance, in who stepped aside and who didn't. And the sheriff, if there was one, didn't command respect by title, but by silence, by what people didn't say when he passed by, and by what they whispered when his back was turned. And the saloon wasn't a place to relax. It was a place to be watched, to be measured, to be remembered. And every eye carried judgment. Every conversation paused a beat too long. When you entered, not from curiosity but calculation, because strangers meant change and change meant risk. And in the West, risk was a currency, more dangerous than gold. And the bartender was more than a man with a bottle. He was the keeper of secrets, the weigher of tension, the one who knew whose horse had gone missing, whose brother hadn't returned from the hills, whose gun hadn't been seen in its holster in 3 days. And he didn't ask questions because he didn't need to. He listened and poured and remembered, and the upstairs rooms weren't just for rest. They were negotiation, confession, escape, and occasionally disappearance. And the women who worked there weren't helpless. They were historians, observers, diplomats. They knew which men lied with their hands, which men drank to forget, which men shouldn't be touched at all, and they stayed alive not by charm but by calculation. They watched the windows, listened to boots on stairs, knew when to speak and when to vanish, and if you thought you could walk in with city confidence, you were already marked not for death necessarily, but for study. And if they decided you were trouble, you wouldn't be shot in the street, you'd be warned, slowly, politely, with smiles that didn't reach the eyes, with compliments that echoed too long, and if you still didn't listen, the town would close in around you, not with violence, but with absence. No horses to rent, no rooms to sleep, and no one willing to make eye contact. And then when you were alone, when the sun set and the wind picked up, you'd understand the true law of the West, that survival wasn't earned, it was granted, and always temporary. And the land didn't mourn it, observed, it didn't punish it, exposed, and every moment you breathed under its sky was a negotiation, an agreement between what you thought you could take and what it was willing to let you have, and when that agreement ended, you didn't always know it until the last moment, when the trail vanished, or the river turned, or the eyes watching you blinked, and the bullet came not from anger, but from rhythm, from a story continuing without you, because that's what the West did. It moved forward with or without your name carved into its memory. If the wind changed direction and carried the scent of burning mesquite and old leather, you'd know you were close to a ranch, but not the kind from novels or tourist paintings. It wasn't a white-fenced dream with grazing cattle and guitar music. It was hard land and harder men. And it demanded more than labor. It demanded loyalty. And if you thought ranch work was just about cattle, you'd be wrong. It was about territory, about water rights, about fences, and who cut them, and who didn't. And every sunrise began with boots on the ground, and eyes scanning the horizon not for beauty, but for movement, because movement meant intrusion, and intrusion meant escalation. And the foreman wasn't a man of speeches, he was a man of signals, of nods and narrowed eyes. And if he gave you a task, you did it not because of respect, but because of rhythm. Because if one part of the machine failed, the whole thing collapsed. And the cows were not gentle. They were muscle and instinct, and stampedes happened fast, without warning. And if you didn't learn to move like them, to breathe with them, you'd find yourself under hooves, not from anger, but from indifference. And horses were not pets. They were partners. They knew when you lied, when you hesitated, when you lacked resolve, and they responded accordingly, some with resistance, others with silence. And if a horse refused to ride, it wasn't broken, it was smarter than you. And if you forced it, you'd find out why in the dirt and blood and fractured ribs, and the nights weren't restful. They were cautious. Every noise outside the bunkhouse mattered, every coyote cry could be cover for something else. And sometimes riders came not for theft, but for message. They'd fire a shot too close to the fence. They'd leave a carcass where the water ran. They'd scrape words into barn doors. Words like leave or traitor or forgiven, and if you didn't understand the meaning, you weren't meant to survive long. And the cook was more powerful than he seemed. He heard everything he saw, who returned from patrol and who didn't, who bled into their shirt and said nothing, who stared too long at the fire. And when he handed you a plate, you knew whether you were welcome or not. Because food wasn't just sustenance, it was signal. And if he passed you a plate with nothing but beans, you had been warned. And if he gave you meat and bread and coffee, he was watching you, waiting to see if you belonged. And ranch politics were older than law. They were born from drought and death and inheritance and revenge. And if two ranches claimed the same stream, it wasn't settled in court. It was settled in fire or lead, and sometimes in the middle of night, a barn would burn and no one would talk about it, but the next week, cattle would be missing, and the foreman would ride out alone and return with dried blood on his boots and silence on his face, and you'd know something had been answered. And when you rode fence, you didn't just repair wire, you read messages, the way posts leaned the way. Boot prints gathered the way dust shifted, and you learned to spot the signs of ambush, the shape of quiet that preceded trouble. And if you were lucky, you never had to draw your weapon. But if you did, you learned quickly that killing a man wasn't the hardest part. It was what came after the eyes of the others. The way they measured your soul, the way some looked away and others nodded, and the way the land remained still unchanged, unimpressed. And you'd realize then that the West didn't care about justice. It cared about order, and order was what the strongest enforced, and the clever maintained, and the lucky escaped. And if you found yourself offered a full bunk and a saddle and a place at the fire, you'd take it not out of comfort but out of strategy. Because in the West, being alone was beautiful for an hour, deadly for a day, and impossible for a week. And the ones who vanished were the ones who forgot that silence in a group was safer than speech alone. There were towns that didn't appear on maps not because they were hidden, but because no one who made maps had reason to care. And if you came across one, it would not welcome you with signs or lights, but with stillness. And the kind of silence that holds its breath. Before thunder, these towns were built from necessity, from railroads that promised to arrive and didn't, from mines that gave up more ghosts than silver, and from people who needed to be forgotten. And in these towns, there were rules not written, not spoken, but lived, and the first rule was, don't ask. The second was, don't stay. And the third was, if you're still here by nightfall, you're part of it now. And the saloons were different in these places. They didn't promise laughter or music, they promised escape for a few coins. You could forget the dust, forget the men who watched you too long, forget the feeling that something inside you had already been claimed, and the bartenders didn't pour to impress. They poured because your silence paid better than your story, and if you tried to tell them where you were, they'd walk away, not out of rudeness, but because the past didn't belong here, and the gamblers were never lucky. They were survivors. Their cards were marked, their glances sharp, and they watched the door more than their hands. And if you won too much, they smiled too wide and suggested a private game, and if you were foolish enough to accept, you never left the room the same. And the women weren't prostitutes. They were informants, spies, avengers. They knew which men to avoid, which rooms to slip, into which letters to steal, and they wore perfume not for attraction but for memory, because the scent stayed on your clothes and marked you for others to find. And the jail was always empty, not because crime was rare, but because punishment came swift and unrecorded. And if a man wronged another, he did not wait for law. He waited for moonlight and quiet streets. And when the sun rose, the town simply adjusted, and the church, if there was one, did not speak of heaven. It spoke of penance, of weight, and wages of blood, and of silence. And the preacher was not holy. He was practical. He bartered prayers for bullets and confessions for names, and his sermons were warnings wrapped in scripture. And the children in these towns did not play. They watched and listened and memorized. They knew which adults to trust, which corners were safe, which shadows meant danger. And they grew up fast or not at all. And the general store was never general. It sold supplies, but also information and lies and hopes in small doses. And the owner knew everyone's real name, even if he never said it. And if you wanted to know the truth about someone, you asked him, but you paid in secrets, not coins. And if you had nothing to trade, he gave you nothing in return. And the undertaker was always busy, even when no one had died, because he prepared early and quietly, and sometimes he'd measure you with his eyes, just in case. And his shop was never locked, because in places like this, death had no boundaries. And if you stayed long enough, the town began to accept you, not with kindness, but with resignation, like a wound that doesn't heal, but stops bleeding. And you'd find yourself changing your walk, your speech, your thoughts, until you couldn't remember what was yours and what was survival. And when you finally left, if you did, you carried the town with you, not in souvenirs, but in habits, in the way you checked, mirrors, in the way you waited, before answering, in the way you never fully trusted silence again. There is a final truth you must face. If you find yourself in the Wild West of 1865, a truth that waits like a shadow behind all the noise and dust and movement, truth that cannot be bartered or avoided or ridden away. From it is this: you do not conquer the West. The West conquers you. It does not care how clever you are, how fast you draw, how good your intentions may be. It is not a story or a stage or a myth. It is a living, breathing, grinding force of hunger and loneliness and raw necessity. and it wears you down one sunrise at a time, one bad meal, one broken wagon, one betrayal, one thunderstorm, one shot fired in the dark, and it does not matter if you came west to escape, or to build, or to seek justice, or revenge, or gold. What matters is what you become. When the West answers you, and that answer is rarely kind, it comes in the form of men who say nothing before pulling the trigger, in the form of women who smile while stealing your name, in the form of land that drinks blood like rain, and does not remember, and at first you resist, you cling to your morals, your past, your plans. But then the bartering begins you. Trade your coat for food, your name for safety, your voice for silence, your future for another day, and soon you begin to forget what mattered in the first place, and you are not weak, you are not foolish, you are simply alone, and the West thrives on that it isolates like a fever, breaks your habits like a storm. It remakes you in its own shape, rough, quiet, tired. And when you look in the mirror, if you have one, you do not see a hero or a villain. You see someone still here, and that becomes enough. And if you ride with others, you learn to never ask where they came from, and to never share where you're going. You nod, you help, you kill if needed, but you do not connect. Not really, because connection means risk, and risk is death. And so your conversations become short, your nights become long, and the fire you once feared, you now crave, not for warmth, but for distraction. And if you're lucky, if you last long enough, you find a rhythm, not peace, never peace, but a kind of truce with the world you learn, which plants numb pain, which rivers carry gold, which trails are haunted, and which are merely dangerous. You memorize the sky, you watch the moon for signs. You listen to the wind as if it carries messages. And perhaps it does, and you begin to believe in things you never would have back east. That horses understand grief, that ghosts follow, wagons that dreams can warn, and the West teaches you its own religion, not of gods, but of grit, sacrifice, of motion. You worship survival, you pray through action, not words. You tithe with scars, and you confess by what you bury, and in time, your old world becomes a dream, a soft, false place of walls and comfort and memory, and you would not go back even if you could not, because you are free, but because you are differenti. The West does not send you back. It absorbs you, it digests you, and when you die, and you will die, it may be quietly from fever or loudly from bullets, but it will not mourn you, it will not mark you, it will not tell your story, unless someone like you survives long enough to speak, and if they do, if they remember your name. It will be in passing like wind through dry leaves, like dust, settling on boots like smoke from a dying fire. The West remembers no one, but it changes everyone, and if you find yourself there, know this, you will not be the same. And that is the closest thing to salvation you will ever find.